Hello, this video is going to demonstrate one common method for rendering characters, especially if you're working in a comic book or cartoon style with defined line art and building up from flat colors. This is a method that many artists use some version of, and maybe it'll be helpful to you. So this is an overview time-lapse of the process of this project. You're going to see the sketch layer first being drawn of an original character of your design, and it can be kind of whatever you want as far as some sort of creature or person, or in this case an alien fairy. And then we're going to ink over that and do some final line art, and then fill in with flat colors, and then add some rendering to the background, light and dark. And we're going to use those light and dark colors to help us see which kind of highlights and shadows to use on the character, and put those on there. And then as a finishing touch, we're going to color the line art slightly, and then we're going to add a color screen to make all the colors kind of blend in together a little bit. Okay, step one, the sketch. We're going to start by setting up a new custom canvas with the width set to 9 inches and the height to 12 inches and the DPI 300. You're going to set your background color to a light gray. That's going to help you see the values better later and see what where your flat colors are. And we're going to name your first layer sketch. Name your first layer sketch. And here's where you're going to sketch an original character of some sort, or some sort of animal or creature. No fan art or copying directly from artists. You can look at reference if you need to, but this should really be from your imagination. It doesn't have to be complicated. It should have a few details such as clothes, hair, wings, etc. And just really see what you come up with. Like I said, sketching first, and just want a few details. No background. We're not drawing any background details, just drawing the character itself and a few details on them. Okay, next you're going to turn down the opacity of the sketch layer to 40% or less, and you're going to create a new layer on top of it, and you're going to name it line art. And then you're going to select a brush that makes clean lines and set your color to black. And then you're basically going to carefully digitally ink the drawing by going over the sketch. Be careful not to leave any gaps, because those will affect the next step. So we don't really want any gaps, because we're going to be using the color drop tool in just a minute, and we're going to use something called a reference layer. But if you have big noticeable gaps in your line art, the color drop will not work as easily. So the goal here is nice clean outlines. It's nice if you can have a little bit of variety in your line weight, some thick and thin lines for detail, thick lines for major outlines or major sections of your character. Okay, now we're going to set this line art layer to reference by clicking on the layer and clicking on reference. And then we're going to turn the sketch layer visibility off. And now step 3, we're going to create a new layer between the sketch and line art ones, and we're going to name it skin flat colors. And on this new layer, you're going to use the color drop to fill in all the skin or fur areas of the character. So in my case, it'll be the skin of this alien, and also his wings, even the spots on his skin. I will end up doing his eye on a different layer. I won't count that as skin, but that's kind of your decision. I'm just trying to get them, make sure that they're all filled in, zooming in and making sure you get all the spots. You can use color drop. You can also use a paintbrush to just do it manually if you need to make sure you get covered everything. And now step 4, we're going to create a new layer on top of that one and name it Details Colors. And on this new layer, we're going to also use color drop to fill in all the clothes and hair and other details on the character. Basically, anything that we didn't do on the skin layer, we want to go ahead and fill in now on the character. And you can just choose those colors, whatever you want. Some of it you might use color drop, some of it you might use a brush. You can see me filling in some of it with a brush. I chose to do the eye on this layer just to keep it separate from the skin. Okay, next, step 5, we're going to render the background. We start by changing the background color, adjusting it to a base color that you want. Something that goes along with your other colors, possibly. And this is a good time to check and make sure that you didn't miss any colored areas in the figure. And then you're going to create a new layer below all your other ones except for the background color and name it Background Render. Okay, so it's right above the background color layer. And on this new layer, you're going to try to use a painterly brush and add light colors of your choice to one side of the image and dark colors of your choice to the other. So we just want to have a fairly simple background. Don't draw any detailed background elements. We just want it lighter on one side and darker on the other, just so it's more interesting than a flat color, and also so we can use those colors to tie into our highlights and shadows on the figure. You'll see how that works in just a minute. And if you want to, you can add an adjustment to that background render layer, such as halftone or Gaussian blur or whatever you want. I ended up using a little bit of Gaussian blur just to blur it a little bit. Now for step 6, we're going to render the skin and fur. So what you're going to do is create a new layer directly above the skin flat colors layer and rename it Skin Shading. We're going to turn this layer into a clipping mask, very important. We're going to change the blend mode for this layer to multiply and set the opacity to 60 to 80%, somewhere in there. This is going to make it somewhat see-through, so you see the original colors through it. And then we're going to select a color that's similar to the darker colors in your background, maybe a little less saturated. And you want to use a painterly or textured brush of your choice to add shading to the character. Now what you're going to do is you're going to add shading to the sides of your character that are facing away from the light source direction. Which side is the light source? That's the lighter side of your background. So we're going to assume that's where the light is coming from, is where the lighter part of your background is. So the side of your characters that's facing away from that light is where you're going to add the shadows on each part. You know, each ear and wing and all that kind of stuff, just for the skin shadows so far. Now what you want to do is save that color that you've been shading with in a custom palette, because you'll want to use that color again on a different layer here in a minute. So next up, we're going to do the highlights by creating a new layer directly above the skin shading layer, and we're going to rename it Skin Highlights. And we're going to turn this layer also into a clipping mask. And we're going to leave the blend mode for this layer on normal, but we're still going to set the opacity to 60 to 80%. And now you want to select a color that is similar to the lighter colors in your background, maybe a little brighter. And again, use a painterly or textured brush of your choice to add highlights to the sides of your character that are facing towards the light source, so the other side from where the shadows were. So now for step 7, we're going to render everything else, the clothes, the hair, the details, and we're going to repeat some of these steps. We're going to create a layer directly above the Details Colors layer and rename it Details Shading. We're going to turn this layer into a clipping mask. We're going to change the blend mode for this layer to multiply, and set the opacity to 60 to 80%. And then you're going to select a color that's similar to the shading color you used on the skin. You know, if you save that in your custom palette, you can just click on it or find something close. And you're going to use a painterly brush or textured brush once again to add shading to the sides of the details that are facing away from the light source direction. So just like we did on the skin, but now on everything else. And then we're going to create a new layer directly above the details shading layer and rename it details highlights. We're going to turn this layer into a clipping mask. We're going to leave the blend mode for this layer on normal and set the opacity to 60 to 80% and select a color that's similar to the highlight color that we used on the skin. And again, start adding highlights to the sides of the character that are facing the light source. And now for step 8, we're going to color the line art itself. And we're going to do this by creating a new layer directly above the line art layer and rename it color holds. And we're going to turn this layer into a clipping mask. And now, whatever you draw on this layer will only appear on the line art itself. So you're going to colorize most or all of the line art in whatever style you want. Don't leave much black, if any at all. And you can do this in a few different ways. You can do kind of a loose painterly way, or you can color each part of the character line art with colors related to the flat colors of that part. That's what I'm doing in this example. You can see I'm using a darker green for the outlines of the skin. And here in a minute you'll see me doing the same thing with the other elements, a darker version of the clothes. You want a pretty dark line usually, but this is a stylistic thing that's kind of fun to know how to do. It kind of gives the artwork a little bit more softer look, and a lot of artists use it, but not everybody. But at least now you'll know how to use it. And again, this is just a common method of rendering that a lot of illustrators and digital artists use. It may or may not end up being the way that you choose to render your artwork or your characters, and that's okay. It's just helpful to know what the process is, and most people customize this and tweak it to how they want to work, and that is totally fine. But it's good to know all of these steps, and so you can decide what works for you. And there's just one more step we'll do here in just a minute. So next we're going to do something that's pretty subtle just to kind of tie all the colors together. So step 9, we're going to add a color screen. And the first thing you're going to do is you're going to turn off the reference setting on the line art layer, and you're going to create a new layer on top of all the others and rename it color screen. And then you want to choose a fairly bright color that you want to use to kind of unify your color scheme. And you might think about if you want the overall image to be cool or warm. I'm choosing like a light blue for mine. And you're going to color drop this color into this layer. It's going to cover everything, but don't worry, we'll adjust it, as you can see, by using blend mode. So you want to change the blend mode of this layer to color, and then drop the opacity to somewhere between 10 and 30%. You choose how much. And as you can see, it ties everything together, makes all the colors just a little bit more like that one color, in this case blue. Okay, and that is it. I hope this is helpful to you as far as learning a common way to add some rendering to your character or illustrations. And again, you'll probably customize this and change this to make it work for you. But that's it.